enter my room and I tell my friends, my roommate, that's the holy place. But around Singapore, you also see that, like you go to visit some of the tourist attractions, some of our the temples of other religions. For example, if you go to the Hindu temple, you have to take off your shoes before you enter the temple compound, even though it's just cement ground. And if you visit a mosque, it's the same. You take off your shoes. In fact, even among our own churches, I know that our brother church down the road, the Indian church, you have to take off your shoes before you enter into the Indian church. And it's a practice. But what is it about shoes? What's wrong with it? Why is it related to a religious institution? Like for the homes, it makes sense, you want to keep it clean, that's your decision. But for a religious institution, why is there a thing with wearing or not wearing shoes? Leaving shoes at the door brings about some concerns. What if I don't find my shoe? What if somebody has the same size shoe and he comes and his shoe breaks and he's like, oh, it's the same size. Goes on with my shoe. When I bring my friends to visit some of these temples, I worry about that. I actually worry about that. So we actually hide our shoes. We hide at the bottom. It's easy, when we put the shoe in the shoe rack, if it's here, it's easy to take. So we actually bother squatting down and putting it inside. And then we take other shoes and cover our shoes up. It's so crazy. But the Bible also talks about taking off of the shoes. So it's not like it's not recorded or written about in the Bible. It is, in many occasions, mentioned in the Bible that you should take off your shoes. The first incident where we read about it is in Exodus chapter 3, verse 5. When Moses, after running away from Egypt for 40 years, he has this encounter with the burning bush. And as he approached the bush to find out what's going on, he was told to take off his shoes. Let's turn with me to Exodus chapter 3, verse 4 to verse 6. Exodus chapter 3, verse 4, verse 6. Exodus chapter 3, verse 4 to 6 says, when the Lord saw that he, Moses, turned aside to see. So Moses noticed there was something burning in the side. He turns around. He wants to go check it out. The moment he turns around, God called out to him out of the bush and said, Moses, Moses. And he said, here I am. And verse 5 said, then he said, do not come near. Take your sandals off your feet, for the place on which you are standing is holy ground. There is a very explicit instruction that when we are in holy ground, when we approach holy ground, we have to take off our shoes. Why are we doing that today? And he said, I am the God of your father, the God of Abraham, the God of Isaac, and the God of Jacob. And Moses hid his face, for he was afraid to look at God. It's not because the bush was a special bush. It's not because that part of the mountain was special. That place was holy simply because God was there. That brings a problem. The Bible claims that God is everywhere. So should we no longer wear shoes as human beings? And when Jesus left, he says, I'm going to send you the counselor, and he's going to live in you. So as long as we're alive and we're Christians, we can't wear shoes. Let's look at another example of where God says, take off your shoes, take off your sandals. The successor to Moses, Joshua, just before he comes and conquers Jericho, he comes into this encounter in Joshua chapter 5, verse 13 to 15. Joshua chapter 5, verse 13 to 15, after the first 5 books of the Bible, after Deuteronomy. Joshua chapter 5, verse 13 to 15. There's another encounter where the very similar instruction was given. And this time to Moses' successor, Joshua, who was being called to lead the Israelites into the promised land, into Canaan. Joshua 5 verse 13 to 15 says, when Joshua was by Jericho, he lifted up his eyes and looked. Again, there was a realization, a noticing. And a man was standing before him with his drawn sword in his hand. And Joshua went to him and said to him, are you for us or for our adversaries? And he said, no. I love the Jewish Hebrew thinking. Is it black or white? Yes. Huh? Are you for us or against us? No. No answer. Or the answer is everything. Or the answer could be depends. No, but I am the commander of the army of the Lord. Now I have come. And Joshua fell on his face to the earth and worshipped and said to him, what does my Lord say to his servant? See, this is very important that you notice that he worshipped and that being who he met allowed him to worship. It tells us he's not just an angel. Because continuously we see somebody bowing down to worship an angel, the angel says, do not, for I'm a fellow creature just like you. But this commander of the Lord's armies accepts worship. Shows that he's not just a regular angel. Accepts it. And Joshua asks, what does my Lord, calls him my Lord, say to his servant? And the commander of the Lord's army said to Joshua, take off your sandals from your feet, for the place where you are standing is holy. And Joshua did so. Again, it was not because the promised land was holy, not because that specific piece of ground was holy. It's because the commander of the Lord's army, God, and I most likely think it would be Jesus himself. Even if any other person, because Jesus is the only express image of God. And if it's the Father, he would have died. So Jesus comes, stands before, and says, take off your shoe. Not because this place is holy, but because I am here. My presence has made this place holy. One more encounter. This one is a little interesting. It's a story that we don't realize is related to the first two stories. The first two stories are always related. You always think about them together. But the next story is where I actually, then crazy Peter says, let me wash my whole body. So when Jesus took off the disciples' feet, he was not just serving them functionally. He was establishing a relationship, connection between him and the disciple. He says, if I wash your feet, you have a part in me. We are connected now. So the question to ask ourselves is, who is he? Who is God to you? Who is Jesus to you? Is he somebody that you worship functionally? You come to church, you worship him because he is God. I have to worship him. I'm expected to worship him. And if I worship him, he will bless me. And that is how this goes. If I don't worship him, I get in trouble. He'll punish me. A functional relationship where we just worship him because he's more powerful than I am. Who is he? Who is God to you? He claims in Exodus chapter 3, he is the great I am. He asked Moses, who are you? He says, I am. But in the burning bush, he said, I am who I am. He's the great I am. His existence doesn't have a cause, doesn't have a start, doesn't have an end. He said, I am who I am. I don't even need to explain myself. I am God. Then in Joshua's case, when the shoes came off, the relationship established and realizing that he's the commanders of the Lord's army. He's powerful. Then thirdly, in the case of Boaz, when Ruth took off Boaz's sandal, she says, will you be my redeemer? Then finally, Jesus himself reverses the role. He now washes the feet of his disciples and says, I am the Savior, Jesus. I come to make you holy. I am holy. This is what I can make you holy. And when you meet the great I am in Moses' situation, the attitude will be a reverence. There is a difference between reverence and fear. Do you know what's the difference between reverence and fear? The fear, when we fear something, when we fear somebody, the focal point is me. What will he do to me? What can he do to me? He cause me harm. He take away my life. He punish me. But reverence is different. Reverence, the focal point is him. How awesome is he? How wonderful is he? How amazing is he? Not about me, but about him. I grew up liking Bruce Lee. I like Bruce Lee a lot. I watched all his old movies. I learned to play with the nunchucks. I read books about him. And I realized, so I had the opportunity, my first trip to Los Angeles, I found out that but one of his very famous disciples who always appeared together with him, and I read so much about, he's still alive, 80 years old. And he has a martial arts school in Los Angeles. So I told my friend, there's one thing I need to do. I need to go to the school. So I drove myself to this school, and I was there. Nobody else was there that day. There was a children's class happening, and I walk in, and lo and behold, it was Guru Dan Inosanto teaching the children's class. And I just stood there, and I was just watching him. Don't know how long has passed. One of his students came and says, "You're here to see the Guru." I'm like, how did you know? You see in your eyes. It was like the person you read about all your life standing right there in front of you. I realized he was a lot shorter than I imagined him to be. At 80 years old, he was still very agile. And when he came in front, he saw me. Guess I looked a little bit star-eyed, and he's like, he's not a kid for class, he's not one of my students. He walked over to say hi. He says, "Hi, I'm Dan." Very, very humble. I just said, "I'm James." I regretted the moment I said that. So impolite. But the moment of who he is, this awe-exuding, legendary personnel standing in front of me. Imagine me a God. For some of you, you've heard about him, read about him, worshipped him all your life since birth. Some of you came to a relationship with him, getting to believe and giving your life to him, accepting him, being baptized in him. Imagine meeting God. Reverence, not because of what he can do to you, but because of who he is. When you meet the commander of the Lord's army, it's a straight instruction to Joshua. Obedience. When we take off our shoes before somebody in a relationship, we're saying, I submit to you. In a way, we're saying, I can't run away now, I got no shoes. In the desert, it's very important. You get bitten by scorpions and vipers and spiders and snakes. Cut some of the rocks and horrible stuff. But he's saying, obey me. I'm the Lord's commander of the Lord's army. When you take off your shoe, reverence, obedience, in the sense of Ruth towards Boaz, was a gratitude. Would you be my redeemer? Would you say? Finally, when Jesus took off the shoes of his disciple, when he reversed the roles between the shoes, he's saying, I love you. I love you enough to take on the role that you're supposed to take on. I love you enough to kneel down and serve you. I love you enough that now you don't have to initiate. I will initiate this relationship with you. This love relationship. Who he is versus what he does. That's the difference between wearing your shoes and taking off your shoes. Reverence or fear. That's the difference between taking off your shoes and wearing your shoes. Obedience or rebellion. Would you listen to the instruction of a being who tells you to take off your shoes, for this is holy ground? Gratitude or callousness, where somebody's going to redeem and save you, and you take it for granted and says, this is what you should do. The opposite of love is not hate, but indifference. When you see your Lord Savior taking off your shoes and washing your feet, what's your reaction to that? Indifference? Like Judas, who still, after his master washed his feet, went off and betrayed him? Or like Peter, like John, saying, Lord, I'll give my life for you. So taking off the shoes is not about physically taking off of your shoes. It's more about your relationship with God. Will your relationship be personal or be functional? The question to ask ourselves as we go through these 10 days of prayer, why do you pray? Do you pray functionally, wanting God to give you things that you want? Or do you pray relationally, saying, Lord, I love you. Thank you for loving me. Let's ponder about that. The Sabbath day, especially when the Lord sets apart to build this relationship with us. The day He asks us to. Don't be burdened by the things of the past week. Spend today getting to know me. I'll give you the peace and the rest you need, and the energy you need for the rest of the week.